Hey, folks, this is Mark Divine. Welcome back to the Unbeatable Mind podcast. Super stoked to have you here today. Thanks again for your time and attention. As you know, I don't take it lightly. There's a lot of things vying for your attention. If you do like this episode, please refer it to a friend, share it out on your social media, and go rate it on iTunes or wherever you listen. It's very helpful for other people to find it. And today's podcast is going to be well worth listening to. I've got my friend and powerful author and communicator, contributor to human potential movement, to how to think well, how to habituate, how to really explode your potential. James Clear, best-selling author of Atomic Habits, sold over 1 million copies. It's incredible. Very rarefied air there he speaks, or he lives in. And, James has just got a unique way of thinking. So I'm really excited to have you back on the podcast, James. Thanks for taking your time, coming out of your cave where you're doing some deep work yourself. And it's good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's great to talk again.
Yeah. Well, I want to get right into people need to learn habits and how to habituate effectively. So I want to get into that and kind of like to discover what you've learned since publishing Atomic Habits. But I also want to talk about best practices around, the influencer kind of movement. I'm extremely impressed with how you built your email list, and I'd love to talk about best practice for that.
Sure.
Two things I noticed, which I think are incredible ideas, but so simple, was just the referral component of your newsletter, right? And so you chunk your newsletter. Let me back up a little bit. You were doing like long form articles. And I remember when we last spoke, you talked about how much time it was taking you to write 1 to 2 of those articles and to get them published, to your standards every week.
Yep.
Do you think that attributed to you building the list that you build, or did it really take off when you went to 3-2-1 Thursdays, which is a much more of a, I'm sure it takes you a lot of time to come up with your content and the quotes, but it's a much more digestible email format.
Right. Yeah. Let me give you a little bit of the kind of history of the email list and like how it worked. And then I think some of the answers will come out through that.
Sure.
So I've been writing for, I've been running my business for over 10 years, but specifically this newsletter is about 8 years that I've been doing it. And the first period of time was the first like 3 or 4 years. I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday. And as you mentioned, that took a lot of effort. Each of those articles, the fastest I think I ever got one done was like 8 hours. Most of the time it took about 20 hours or so, 15 to 20 hours. And then occasionally there's a really, really long one that's like 40 hours or something like that, but that would be rare. So it was basically a full-time job to write those 2 pieces a week.
Now, can I pause there? So I'm assuming that a lot of that work contributed or was repurposed for Atomic Habits.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be more. I thought it was going to be like 50-50, that maybe half the book would be stuff that I had written previously. What ended up happening is many of the ideas formed a kernel of something that was in the book or was like the starting material for a chapter. But I ended up having to rewrite so much and rework it so much that I think how it ended up was about 90% of the material was new. And 10% of the material, had been part of those articles. But the big advantage I had was that even if the chapter ended up being very different in terms of needing to rewrite it, the core idea was always there. And
you weren't blank slating
tested through the email list. Like this is one of the huge benefits of having an email list and audience. Not only do you have an audience to launch a book or a podcast or some product to, it's also live testing, like I got to try, say, over those first couple of years, I wrote, 200 plus articles. And I knew by the time I signed the book deal, these are my top like 20 ideas. These are the ones that go really well. And so those ideas were definitely going to be in.
You saying that based upon open rates or comments or?
Yeah. I can't do this now because the audience is too large, but back then when I was getting started, I would respond to each email individually. And so some of it is just taste and feel as a creator. You're getting all this feedback whenever you put out an article, and you can tell which ones the people are really excited about, or more, you get more responses to.
Mhm.
And then some of it is data driven. You know, you
Right.
can just look at how many Google Analytics, how many people are reading this, you know, how many shares did it get on Facebook or Twitter, or, you know, things like that.
Right.
Long time ago, I used to have comments on the site. So I, you know, for the first year or two, I'd look at how many comments articles got. So you have different forms of data, and
Mhm.
some of it's math, some of it is, you know, art, and
Right.
in together in combination, you have a pretty good sense for what goes well.
How do you generate ideas?
Well, now I have more ideas than I have time to work on.
Right.
You know, for a little while, so I had this funny thing happen, which is I started writing. I was putting these articles out each week. The audience is growing. And at one point, I hit, after about 2 years, I got to 100,000 subscribers. And I had this moment when I got there where I thought, oh, shoot, you know, a lot of people are paying attention now. Now it needs to be really good.
Right.
And so I put all this pressure on myself to spend more time writing, because I figured, well, if I spend more time on it, then it'll be better.
Mhm.
And this kind of strange, ironic thing happened, which is that it actually got worse.
Mhm.
And it was like a painful lesson I had to learn. But actually, if the writing isn't good enough, if I feel like I don't have enough new ideas, if I feel like I'm struggling to come up with something creative, I actually don't need to spend more time writing. What I need is to spend more time reading.
Mhm.
And now the way that I think about it is, writing is like driving a car, reading is like filling your car up with gas.
Mhm.
And you need both if you want to go on a journey, right? Like, the point of having a car is not just to sit at the gas station all day and fill it up with gas endlessly.
Mhm.
So you shouldn't just be sitting around consuming constantly. But you also aren't going to get very far if you just try to keep driving. Eventually, you're going to run out of gas. And
Mhm.
so you need this balance. Um, and, you know, pretty much every idea that you have is downstream from what you consume.
Mhm.
So I think very carefully about, you know, what am I choosing to read? And then I also think really carefully about, who do I follow on social media? Because,
Mhm.
you know, the truth is, I get a lot of ideas from Twitter at this point.
Really?
And it's because I've spent so much time curating the feed of people that I follow.
Right.
You know, nobody really thinks about it this way, but when you choose who to follow on Twitter or Instagram or wherever, in a sense, you're choosing your future thoughts,
Right.
because these are the people that are creating the information stream, or the flow of ideas that you're going to interact with, you know, multiple times a day if you're logging in there a lot. So
Right.
I think coming up with good ideas is mostly reading more and crafting good information flows.
Right. What's your rhythm like as a writer? Like daily kind of rhythm?
Well, I'm trying to find a new rhythm now,
Right.
but I've gone through different phases. I think I've come to this realization, you know, people like hearing about writers' routines. I remember
Yeah.
reading an article about, I
Mhm.
think it was Maya Angelou, she would rent out a hotel and go there
Mhm.
and go to the hotel room just to write her book. And
Mhm.
she would work there all day, and then she'd leave and go back to her house. Um, but now that I'm on the other side, I've been doing it long enough, for years. I'm like, okay, obviously she wasn't doing that early in her career, right? She
Right.
probably didn't have the money or the success to like pay for a hotel room she wasn't going to use.
Mhm.
So maybe she did that during a portion of her career, but that's not the only way she wrote.
Right.
And I try to be that way as a writer as well. Like, I don't want to be dependent on a single circumstance for me to be able to
Mhm.
write. Like,
Mhm.
the truth is, I wrote parts of Atomic Habits from my parents' couch in their living room, from hotel rooms when I was traveling, from my office, you know, at my house. Like,
Mhm.
I wrote it in many different places.
Right.
So I want to be flexible and resilient as a writer, and not need it to be a certain way in
Yeah.
order to write. But having said that, my general pattern is I tend to do most of my writing either early in the morning or late at night. It's either the
Mhm.
first thing that I do when I wake up, I get a glass of water and then I go, you know, take a shower and I go write, or it's after everybody's gone to bed and the day is kind of dialed down and I have a couple hours free where I'm not getting interrupted. And
Mhm.
those are usually the two pockets where most of it happens.
That's interesting. Yeah, I kind of share that. I've tried many different ways of writing, and so now I've stopped trying to find a way. Just allow it to happen.
Right.
I've done the whole retreat thing. I've done the trying, just write every morning for an hour,
Oh yeah, I've done the
Word
writing
blocks.
retreat too. I did that a couple months ago. I went to a cabin in the woods for 3 days, worked on the
Sometimes
next
it's
book.
nice.
But
Yeah.
it, as long as you're doing the work, I don't think I have to worry about it too much. The problem is when too many days go by and you haven't been writing consistently, and then you're like, okay, now we need a more, serious concerted effort here.
So I think
But
it's also interesting, just like the different mindset between writing new content and editing. So a good part of the book process is actually editing and rewriting, as you know, probably much more time than writing new content,
Yep.
And I've written, I don't know about with Atomic Habits, but when I wrote Staring Down the Wolf, I mean, I wrote the book, and then when I rewrote it, I think like 90% of the words changed. You know what I mean? It's like I wrote a whole new book.
Yeah. The first draft of Atomic Habits was 720 pages.
Wow.
And then the finished version is about 250. So there was an enormous amount of rewriting and revision and editing. And the funny thing is I didn't really eliminate that much. There were maybe one or two chapters that got pulled out of the book and just were not included in any form. But for the most part, it was condensing. It was saying the same stuff that I said in those 720 pages, but
Just much
instead of
clearer.
repeating myself or saying it in an ineffective way or in a long-winded way, it was, saying in one sentence what I had been saying in one paragraph.
Right.
And it was just that for basically the entire book. And that
Yeah.
got us down to, 300 pages or so.
Honestly, I think that's why the book has landed so well. And I really appreciated that about that book. It's like every sentence, was content rich. And sometimes I pick up a book and I'm like, and you could read a whole paragraph and they haven't gotten to the point yet.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, how could
that
this
drives me nuts. I appreciate you saying that.
Too.
I spent a lot of time on that. And I think there are a lot of books, nonfiction books, business books, whatever, that are 200 pages, but should be 20.
Right.
And I didn't want to fall into that trap. So the only way I knew how to do it was to write 700 and make it 200. And then you can be sure that, you're actually saying something. But
there you go. A painful recipe for success, folks.
Very. Yes. Yeah. And
awesome.
I actually there's this quote by Alain de Botton where he says something like, of many books, the reader thinks if only the writer's appetite for suffering had been a little greater, then it could have been truly exceptional.
Right.
And that sort of became it's a little dark, but it became my mantra when I was writing the book. I just kept telling myself, like, you just need to suffer a little bit more and then it'll be great. And it's a hard way to wake up each day and do that for like 2 years, but that's what it took.
I did an interview with Stephen Pressfield, who I know you're familiar with, and he said something similar. Like everyone thinks that writers just get up and, they just have this idyllic lifestyle and the words just flow right onto the paper through them. And he's like, no, it's hard work when you stare at that page every day and you have to overcome that resistance. You suffer.
It's one of the ultimate forms of delayed gratification because you have to research the book, write it, revise it, edit it, send it to your publisher, go back and forth on all those edits. If you're doing a launch the right way, you end up doing all the launch work. You do a bunch of interviews, you do write all the emails for your audience, social posts, all this stuff. Everything that I've described has all happened before you sell a single copy. You haven't even gotten to launch day yet.
Right.
And so that's probably, like in my case, it was like 3+ years of work before even a single day the book has been out. So, but if you're willing to do all that work and do it the right way and do each step well, then the result can be amazing. It feels, the crazy thing about books, and I think the reason writers end up talking themselves into doing another one, it's absolutely brutal when you're doing all that upfront work. But then afterward, the work is already done. And now you get to just keep reaping the rewards day in and day out. And so then, you turn around 2 or 3 or 6 months later and you're like, this is kind of great. People are reading it and they're enjoying it. Like, I haven't been doing any work for 6 months now. Like you forget how difficult it was. So then you're like, oh, maybe I should try another one. So it's very much a seasons of extremes. But yeah.
Do you subscribe to the belief that you shouldn't write another book unless it can be better than the previous work? I've heard some people say that.
I guess no.
Sure. I don't either,
Yeah, I guess my answer is no. And the only reason is I just don't know that it I don't think you should write a book unless you feel like you have something to say. You know, a lot of people want to write a book just because they want to have a book. But it's just too big of a project and requires too much energy and effort for, I think, that to be the reason. I think you need to be genuinely internally motivated and interested in it. But I don't know that it's healthy, or I don't know it's helpful to be comparing your works, you know, and be, well, it's not going to be as good as the last one or whatever. It just is the weird thing being a creative is, in many ways, you're a terrible judge of your own work. Like, on the one hand, you need to trust your taste and trust your instincts, and, you know, work on things in the way that you think is best, or share the best ideas that you've come across. And all that stuff is judgment calls. So you got to be willing to trust yourself to do that well. But then on the other hand, even though you're trying your best each time, you don't know which articles or which books or which projects are going to go over really well. And I'm invariably surprised by which of my, even little stuff, even tweets, go over well, or which articles go over well. And so I think the only lesson you can take from that is you just have to be, you know, a consistent creator. If you really care about it and try your best each time, just keep showing up and, you know, banging the rock with the hammer, just keep shipping. And then eventually, you know, you break through.
Keep shipping. I love that. I mean, you referenced the 3 years of head banging work, or banging rock work, before you ever sold a single book. What's great about that is you're building your platform.
Yes.
Right. So
yeah. So let me return to your email
preparing
question
for that, you know?
Yeah, because so I spent those first couple of years writing articles, and then I signed the book deal for Atomic Habits. So at this point, my audience is around 200,000 subscribers or so. So I mentioned that because
that's not insignificant. I mean,
right. That strategy of writing 2 articles a week, that alone is a very good strategy for building an email list. So, you know, do great work, show up consistently, focus on the growth of your own audience and providing something valuable each week. Like, that can get you a large audience itself.